Welcome, you're watching Kaleidoscope Srilanka Live News Capsule. Sri Lanka's focus over the last few years has been to move from a place of crisis to some stability. And in this, the primary policy priority was to make sure that the fiscal environment was conducive for growth and investment. Interest rates decreased, the currency became stable, and inflation steady. With the new government in place, what are the priorities in the next few years? Here to discuss is Chayu Damsinghe, Head of Macroeconomic Advisory of Frontier Research. So what are the reforms in priority order that must be implemented if we are to move forward?
So let's answer that in two kind of ways. So one is dealing with the fact that moving into this growth pathway comes with costs and differences of its own. Sri Lanka is an economy that has been consumption-led across for quite some time now. So growth meaning more imports, then how do you deal with the context of more imports? How do you, for example, encourage exports if that is the goal? If it's tourism, how that is the goal? How to deal with the on-ground complexities of all those kinds of mechanisms? How do you deal with the costs of them? That's, I think, one direction of policy change. Reform almost, but policy direction I think the government will look at. But the second will be the general reform areas that Sri Lanka has generally been quite weak in. That is labour reform, land reform, this big scale SOE reform, as well as the newer ones, things like investment that have not really been something, and things like digitalization. So I think those are the areas we have not really seen strong reform progress, not just this government. And I see that not as a issue with policy will or political intentions, but rather as a more structural factor of the Sri Lankan economy and the Sri Lankan society. And dealing with that, I think, is where that reform I would look at.
So how challenging is it going to be to get these reforms off the ground?
I think quite challenging because fundamentally we've never really done them, right? We have always had some form of labor kind of changes that happen. We've had some form of land changes that happen. And that has happened regardless of who the government in play is, regardless of what their political incentives, political ideology has been. So I don't think that is primarily the driver, but the fact that a lot of the reasons why we haven't moved on these measures, even on things like SOEs, even things like investments, is that the Sri Lankan socio-economic structure, the socio-political structure, the econo-political structure, all of that is kind of geared to maintain status quo because that is how a system perpetuates itself. It has to maintain itself first. So I think given that, dealing with reforms is not just about putting out a gazette, changing a law, not just the political intention, but also dealing with that complex reality of why that has not been moving for the last multiple decades, and then dealing with the very challenging idea that you are dealing with, essentially restructuring the idea of how Sri Lanka views itself, how Sri Lanka's economy functions, how Sri Lanka's society functions, and that is a very hard thing. It's something that I think will take time to do. I don't think it will not happen. Plenty of countries across the world have seen this change, but it does take time. So I'm not expecting anything overnight, but I do think progress will continue as it has for the last multiple decades. Slow progress, but progress nevertheless.
Do you think the planned reforms are sufficient? If not, what needs to change?
I think some of these planned reforms are things that very much came in from I think the depths of the crisis itself, so from the prior administration itself, and even from before that as well. And the current administration, of course, is continuing plenty of those in at least directionally. Where I see, and I don't see there to be a lot of difference in the way that a lot of these are implemented on the ground. What I do see a lot of difference is the rhetoric on how that's kind of framed to society, and that can help or hinder the way that is accepted by society, because if, from my view, we're talking about something that's a lot more of a restructuring of the way the economy works, restructuring the way the kind of socio-economic, socio-political dynamics work, that is something that rhetoric does play a very big role in. Communication plays a big role in, rhetoric plays a big role in, framing plays a big role in. So there, I think there is, the very fact that the prior administration was voted out means that that framing simply did not work, or at least was not suited for that moment, for that time. What does that mean then with the new, is there going to be new kind of framing? There likely has to be, given the new administration has come in, but how will that evolve as the context in which now they have to work in also changes? It is something will be an open question for me, but something I will look at from that kind of perspective.
Debt restructuring is a priority. What would our creditors be demanding of this new administration?
I think the simple one is to now all the kind of deals that have essentially been done, the kind of restructuring arrangement agreements, for them to just be implemented. And I don't think the new administration has indicated anything different, that they will be kind of continuing on with that pathway, finalizing the implementation that was anyway at the kind of last mile. So I don't think too much of an issue there. Where I think the next steps beyond that is how can the new administration, particularly because in the foreign media in particular, the label Marxist was a lot more applied and explicitly pointed out to this new administration, and that has not generally in other markets been the kind of label that has helped the kind of inclusion into financial markets. Such leaders in general haven't. I don't think Sri Lanka's context is anything like that. But then how do you look at the international markets that might be looking at you in a particular way and convince them that this is not going to be this massive disruption to their status quo. This is just going to be one that continues on nevertheless.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe, follow and like us for more.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Srilanka Life.